In the name of God, hello everybody. This is session 7 of your morphology lesson. As you know, in the previous sessions, we talked about, the definition of morphology, the morpheme, allomorph, and the definition of words. How can we, determine the words, phonological words, syntactic words, lexemes, and the approaches which are related to morphology, analytic and synthetic approach. And at this chapter, I want to talk about the relationship between morphology and phonology. As you see here, Morphology and Phonology is the title of the chapter 3. This chapter explores some of many interactions that take place between morphology and phonology. These interactions and the grammar that describes them are often called morphophonology. So this relationship between phonology and morphology, we call it morphophonology or morphophonemics. So we begin in this chapter by looking at phonological processes such as, for example, assimilation and the effect that they have on the shapes of morphemes. We then consider limitations on the phonological shape of morphological entities such as words and stems. From there, we move on to two general types of affixes that are distinguished in part by phonological criteria. Their phonological behavior reveals details about their underlying structure and the point at which they attach to their bases. We conclude with a look at secret languages in which morphology and phonology interact to disguise the shape of words. Then, to understand the discussion in this chapter, you need to know three terms that are often not introduced in such courses. They are onset, these are the terms you should know: onset, nucleus, and coda. The onset of a syllable is made up of the first consonant or consonants. The nucleus is a syllable's core, usually a simple vowel or a diphthong. And the coda is made up of the consonant or consonants that follow the nucleus. All syllables must have nuclei. Onsets and codas are optional. So, though some languages require the former. So, this is the definition of onset, nucleus, and coda, which you should know to understand some phenomena of this chapter. So we start the allomorphs. What is allomorph? The term allomorph was introduced in the first chapter, in two contexts. As you know, in some languages, like, for example, Quechua, we noted that the stem, for example, Baj, has two possible shapes. For example, Baj and Bej. So these are, the allomorphs of the underlying morpheme. So in English, the plural marker comes in several shapes. Among them, S as in lips, Z as in balls, and S as in roses, N as in oxen, and the null as in sheep. These are the allomorphs of the plural, morpheme in English language. So in this chapter, we are most interested in alternation based purely on phonological context. In the English data, for example, only the first three allomorphs of the plural affix depend on phonological context. The last two, as in oxen and sheep, are lexical, and we will not be concerned with them here. So, like the English plural suffixes, the English past tense suffix has three forms: d and t and ed. Here, blamed, you see here, we pronounced d here. Jumped, you see here, we pronounce te, and a dead, we pronounce ed. These are again the allomorphs of past tense in English language, as you see in this example. The distribution of the three allomorphs is predictable and parallel to the distribution of the three allomorphs of the English plural suffixes. You see here, de is found on verbs ending in a vowel or a voiced consonant. You see here, with the exception of alveolar stop de. Te is found in on verbs that end with a voiceless consonant, with the exception of alveolar stop te. In verbs that end with te and de, we find ed, like aided. Here you see. So we can formulate the distribution of the allomorphs in even simpler terms. The English past tense suffix is de. I mean, this is the underlying past tense suffix, where we find te. The de has assimilated to the preceding segment in voicing. Where we find ed, I mean this a or schwa has been added by an automatic phonological rule of epenthesis. We call it epenthesis because we add some, vowel here, epenthesis. So we call it epenthesis. That is triggered by the fact that the final segment in the verb and the suffix itself agree in both place and continuously. We can call the basic form or the basic allomorph of the English past tense suffix. It is not always easy or even possible to determine the basic form of a morpheme. To do so, we must decide which form of a morpheme best accounts for the full range of the data. Consider the two words from classical Greek given below. The forms on the left are in the nominative case used for subject, and those on the right are in the genitive case. You look at again this example, as I told you. This is the example from Greek. So you see here, we have we should determine the basic form of the data. Consider again the two words from classical Greek. You see here, we have here, these are two examples. For example, this is the Greek word, so maybe the pronunciation is not correct. Atypus, you see here again, atypus, and plebs and plebos. You see here, we here we have p here and we have b here. But if we want to determine the basic form, what can we do? On the basis of these two forms, we can hypothesize that the nominative in Greek is formed by the addition of s, and that the genitive is formed by the addition of os. You see here, we have s here and os here. You see here. What then are the basic form of the stem meaning these two words? With respect to the first, the answer seems simple. Comparing the nominative and genitive form, we isolate Aethiop. Finding the basic stem meaning vein is more difficult. This is if we want to determine the basic form of these two, the first row. You see here, this is simple because we drop s here and os here. So Aethiop is the basic form. But the second row, it is difficult to determine the basic form of plebs and plebos. You see here, if the basic form of the stem were pleb, with pe, we would have no explanation for why speakers of classical Greek did not simply add os, as with Ethiopos. For example, we produce here plepos. Why? Positing an underlying stem of pleb instead makes the genitive form plebos understandable. With an addition step of assimilation and voicing, it also allows us to explain the nominative form plebs. So this is the the basic form. Pleb is the basic form. So in the genitive form, we add just os to it, and we have plebos. That's okay. But why we have here pe instead of be? Because by adding the s here, s is a kind of voiceless consonant. So we have here kind of assimilation. So B becomes voiceless and becomes P here because of assimilation of voicing to the S. So we have plebs. So the basic form is pleb, and here by adding S, this B becomes P, the voiceless P, because of assimilation with S, which is voiceless. So this is, I mean, the basic form of this word in Greek, as you see here. So allomorphs are often the product of assimilation, like the one that, I mean, takes de to te in words like, for example, jumped. We pronounce it te because pe is voiceless, and because of assimilation we pronounce it te, jumped. You see here? Or baked, or kissed. You see here? Or that takes, for example, like the previous Greek example, plebs. So in the case of the English past tense suffix, the voicelessness of the final consonant in the verb spreads forward to the suffix in what we call progressive assimilation. So we have two kinds of assimilation. Progressive assimilation. In the classical Greek example, the voicelessness of the nominative suffix moves in the opposite direction. We call it regressive assimilation. So we have two kinds of assimilation. Another example of regressive assimilation is found in Spanish, word final nasal consonants assimilates in place of articulation to following consonant in many, different contexts. You see here these examples. For example, we have con, the basic form, morpheme. When it is near the me, we call it conmigo, or come Maria. You see here, this is a kind of regressive assimilation because n becomes m, like this me, which is a kind of regressive assimilation. Or we have con near this dental consonant te, de, you see here, and we have kong near the ge, kong Gabriel. You see here, this is a kind of, again, regressive assimilation which you see in the Spanish example. So assimilation like that seen with the Spanish con, as you see, is frequent in the world's languages, and thus source of allomorphy, one kind of source of allomorphy. Epenthesis, I talk about the epenthesis in the previous part. Epenthesis is another common source of allomorphy. Frequently, languages epenthesize consonants in contexts where a final vowel in one word would otherwise come up against an initial vowel in the following word, particularly when the two have a strong syntactic bond. We call this unwanted vowel contact hiatus. French is a language that doesn't tolerate hiatus well, and it has various ways of eliminating it in certain syntactic contexts. So we have another phenomena which we call it hiatus, when we have two vowels in each other, and some languages do not tolerate this hiatus, vowel. So we have some consonant between, we put some consonant between these two vowels, we call it epenthesis. For example, look at these French examples. Again here, le, mezzo, this is okay, but we have here le, ami, because we have two vowels each other and near each other, ne, le, e, and ami, e, a. So we have a kind of consonant between, we put some consonant between these two vowels, we call it les amis. So you see here we put a consonant between these two vowels, we call it epenthesis. Or c'est médecin, c'est on. You see here, c'est on, this is c'est on, we have two vowels near each other, so we put some consonant between them, so we pronounce it c'est on. Mon analyse and and this one again more on kill, so we put some consonant between them, so we call it kind of hiatus, vowel, and we put consonant between these two vowels, and we call it epenthesis. So this is another kind of source of allomorphy. The first one is assimilation, as I talk about it in Spanish model and some other examples, and this one is epenthesis, which we talk about by using French examples, as you see here. So this is another example. So again, in some other dialects, we have another kind of allomorphy. Here you see here we have an epenthesis again. We have here da, zerne, this is okay, but when we have da or des, we have two vowels near each other, a and a, we put some a consonant here and we call it dad or des. So this is again kind of epenthesis here. So the other example, an instructive case, is that of Spanish, as shown by the following set of data. So you see el agua, you see here, but when we have two vowels near each other, again we put L between le between these two vowels, again we call it el alma. So this is in Spanish, all of the Spanish nouns, some of the this particle and these prepositions or maybe articles is belong to masculine. El is a kind of masculine definite article, and la is the feminine. But when the next word begins with a kind of vowel, and it is, for example, feminine, we cannot use la because we have a kind of hiatus here, so we use masculine definite article, so we call it el alma. So this is the process which we can explain in the Spanish models. So these are the sources of the allomorphy again, the epenthesis, putting some consonants between two vowels and breaking that hiatus, which some languages do not tolerate that hiatus. So these are the examples of allomorphy as you see here. So another phenomena which I want to talk about it is prosodic morphology. What is prosodic morphology? You see here in this chapter, in the first part, I talk about the allomorph and some sources of the allomorph. One of them is assimilation and the other is epenthesis. And I talked about some examples from Spanish, French, and English, and some other languages. But what is prosodic morphology? Prosodic morphology deals with the interaction of morphology and prosodic structure. Prosodic structure is particularly concerned with the timing units of languages. For example, the word and syllable, and vowel length, for example. From this general category, we present three phenomena: phenotactic constraints, the first one; root and pattern morphology, the second one; and the last one, reduplication, the third one. So we have three phenomena related with prosodic morphology. The first one, which I want to talk about it, is phenotactic constraints. What is phenotactic constraints? Phenotactic constraints limit the possible phonological shapes of stems and words. Phenotactic constraints are often, but not always, connected with syllable structure. At their most basic, phonotactic constraints determine the minimum length of content words in particular languages. For example, in some languages, uh, um, each content word contains at least two syllables, for example. Other languages require that content word consists of at least a heavy syllable, where heavy means that the syllable contains a long vowel or diphthong or a vowel and a weight bearing consonant. Many languages do not have minimal word constraint, including, for example, Romanian, Icelandic, and some other languages. Does English, this is a question which you may think about it, does English have a minimum word constraint? An analysis of nicknames suggests that it does. Okay, you know the nicknames. For example, English nicknames: Alexander, we call it Alex; Caroline, Carrie; Catherine, Cathy or Kete; Josephine, Jo; Louis, Lou; Susan, Sue; Tyler, Ty; Beverly, Bev; Christopher, Chris; Robert, Bob; Stephen, Steph. You see here, we call it nicknames. Even if we were to keep going, we would find that any nickname we can think of falls into one of these three sets. They are either polysyllabic, like 9a, names, or monosyllabic names like 9b and c that have either a diphthong, a coda, or both. No native English nickname consists of a single light syllable. From this data, it seems that English falls in with the set of languages that have a minimal word constraint. Even the shortest of nicknames, must consist minimally of a heavy syllable or two light syllables, and it is difficult, if not impossible, to find an English content word that contradicts this conclusion. We also, so again, you see English, uh, I mean, uh, 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 English has a minimal word constraint. So even the shortest, you see here, we also find that languages have restrictions on the possible shapes of roots. NIDA reports that in the, for example, Mayan languages, roots are predominantly of the shape CVC. For example, we should use this kind of syllable in this language. And in, for example, Bantu language, they are generally CVCV. Or in Hebrew, Arabic, I mean, other Semitic languages, roots generally consist of three consonants: C, C, C. This is the, I mean, the paradigm which we use in Arabic languages, in Semitic, I mean, languages like Arabic and Hebrew. This is so the definition of, I mean, phonotactic constraints. As you see, some languages, I mean, have this kind of constraints on their language, like English language in nicknames. The other, I mean, pattern which we use in some languages is root and pattern morphology. What is this kind of, I mean, morphology? We ended the last section by saying that in Semitic languages such as Hebrew and Arabic, roots generally consist of three consonants. To form words, vowels are superimposed on this consonant pattern. We call this type of morphology root and pattern. So look at this example. The following form share a, I mean, three consonantal rule. For example, M, L, K. These are three consonants. In some, the root consonant K is realized as the affricate Kh. Okay, you see, Melek. So we superimpose the vowels on that, I mean, three consonant pattern. Or Malaka, Malak, Yamluk, Malakut, Mamluk. You see here, Mamlaka. These are, I mean, words which can produce by these three consonantal roots, which we superimpose the, I mean, vowels on the patterns, and we produce the different words with different meaning. You see here, this is a kind of pattern which we use in Semitic languages like Arabic languages, as you know. So in root and pattern morphology, the root consonants in a given inflectional or derivational paradigm combined with vowels and sometimes consonants in a fixed pattern, it is possible to think of the consonantal rule being superimposed on the template. Okay, this is again another idea. Words of a given class typically share a single pattern. Referring again to the box above, in Hebrew grammar, melech, for example, is called a kind of noun. The other words again with different meaning, we can produce them according to different patterns which you see here in these three consonantal pattern. So as an aside, the root and pattern morphology, of Hebrew and Arabic is reflected in their writing system. So which use the primary symbols to represent consonants and this diacritics to represent vowels. You see the writing system of Arabic language. While by definition there are no exceptions to the minimal word constraint presented in the previous section, we do sometimes find exceptions to generalization about possible root shape. In the Semitic languages, we do find roots consisting of two consonants, for example, double C, and four C, 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 C. But these are less numerous than three consonantal, roots. So McCarthy remains one of the most influential studies of root and pattern morphology. Is a good starting point for further exploration of the phenomena. So these are the root and pattern morphology which we see in some languages like Hebrew languages, like Arabic, Semitic languages like Hebrew and Arabic. And the third one is reduplication, which I will talk about it in the next session. So in this session, as you see, I talk about the relationship between morphology and phonology, which we call it morphophonemic pattern. Then I talked about the allomorph. How can we produce allomorphs? By some processes like assimilation and some processes like epenthesis, and by using examples from Spanish, Greek and French. I talked about this process for producing some allomorphs, and at last I talk about the prosodic morphology. We have three phenomena in this domain: phonotactic constraint, root and pattern morphology, and reduplication, which I talked about these three phenomena in this chapter. And the third one, I will talk about the reduplication in the next session. So I think that's enough for today. Thank you for your attention, and goodbye everybody.